In the spring of 1985, Coca Cola made one of the most famous and misunderstood decisions in modern business history when it announced that it would be changing its flagship formula, a move that would spark public outrage, emotional backlash, and one of the most dramatic reversals any major brand has ever experienced. To understand why Coca Cola changed its recipe in the first place, you have to understand the pressure the company was under in the decades leading up to that moment. By the late 1970s and early 80s, Coca Cola was no longer the unquestioned king of the soft drink world. Pepsi had been gaining ground aggressively, especially among younger consumers, and the famous Pepsi Challenge taste test suggested something alarming to Coca Cola executives. When people tasted the drinks blind, many preferred Pepsi. This was deeply unsettling for a brand that had built its identity not just on flavor, but on tradition, familiarity, and cultural dominance. Coca Cola had been around since the late 19th century, and its formula was treated almost like a sacred artifact. Yet market research was telling executives that taste, at least in controlled tests, favored their biggest rival. Coca Cola responded by doing what large corporations often do when faced with data driven fear. They studied, they tested, they analyzed, and they slowly convinced themselves that the problem was the product itself. Over years of research involving thousands of taste tests, Coca Cola developed a new formula that was slightly sweeter and smoother, designed to perform better in sip tests where immediate taste mattered most. The new formula consistently scored higher than both Pepsi and the original Coke in blind testing. On paper, it looked like a win. What the data did not measure was emotional attachment. It didn't account for memory, ritual, identity, or the powerful role Coca Cola played in American culture. Executives believed they were making a rational update to stay competitive in a changing market. They didn't fully grasp that Coca Cola was not just a beverage, it was a symbol. When New Coke was officially introduced in April 1985, the company discontinued the original formula entirely. This was not marketed as an option or a limited release. It was framed as a replacement. Almost immediately, backlash began. Consumers flooded Coca Cola with phone calls, letters, and complaints. Some people hoarded cases of the original Coke. Others wrote emotional messages describing Coke as a part of their family traditions, holidays, and childhood memories. Protest groups formed. Media coverage intensified. What shocked Coca-Cola executives most was the intensity of their response. People were not simply disappointed, they were angry, heartbroken, and in some cases, genuinely distressed. This reaction revealed something the company had underestimated. Coca-Cola was woven into personal identity in a way that taste tests could never capture. The outrage was not about sweetness or carbonation, it was about loss. New Coke became a cultural punching bag almost overnight. Comedians mocked it. News programs covered it as a national controversy. The brand that had once symbolized unity and nostalgia now found itself at the center of a consumer rebellion. Internally, Coca-Cola was scrambling. Executives were shocked by how quickly public opinion had turned and how personal the reaction had become. Sales of New Coke were not quite catastrophic in isolation, but the damage to brand trust was growing by the day. The company faced a dilemma: admit a mistake or double down. Within just 79 days, Coca-Cola made the decision to bring back the original formula under the new name Coke Classic. When the announcement was made, the reaction flipped almost instantly. Consumers celebrated. Media framed it as a triumphant return. People lined up to buy the original Coke again. It felt like a victory for the public, as if consumers had forced a massive corporation to listen. The return of Coke Classic became one of the most successful product reintroductions in history. Almost immediately, conspiracy theories began to circulate. Some people believed Coca-Cola had planned the entire thing. According to this theory, the company intentionally introduced an unpopular product so that bringing back the original would generate massive goodwill, publicity, and renewed affection for the brand. It was an appealing narrative. It framed Coca-Cola as a marketing mastermind rather than a company that made a costly miscalculation. The theory spread quickly and has lingered for decades. In response to these claims, Coca-Cola president Donald Keough famously addressed the speculation with a blunt and revealing statement. He said, "We're not that dumb, and we're not that smart." The quote became iconic because it cut through the mythology surrounding the event. Keogh acknowledged that the company had misjudged the emotional bond people had with the original Coke, while firmly rejecting the idea that the chaos was intentional. His statement humanized the mistake. It framed New Coke not as a calculated manipulation, but as a genuine failure to understand consumers on an emotional level. The truth is that New Coke's decision was driven by fear. Coca Cola was afraid of losing relevance, afraid of losing younger drinkers, afraid of Pepsi's momentum. In that fear, the company leaned too heavily on data and ignored intuition, history, and cultural meaning. Taste tests measured immediate preference, not long-term loyalty. They didn't measure how people felt when they saw the red can, or how Coke fit into moments like family dinners, road trips, and holidays. By removing the original formula entirely, Coca-Cola unknowingly told consumers that tradition could be discarded if the numbers said so. That message was deeply unsettling. When Coke Classic returned, it restored more than a flavor. It restored a sense of stability. People felt heard. They felt validated. The return became symbolic, not just for Coca-Cola, but for consumer power. It was a rare moment where public opinion visibly forced a corporate reversal. That narrative has endured because it taps into a desire to believe that large companies can still be held accountable. In the years that followed, Coca-Cola carefully reframed the story. Rather than hiding from the mistake, it leaned into transparency. Executives spoke openly about what they had learned. The company emphasized listening, humility, and respect for consumer attachment. Ironically, the failure strengthened the brand in the long run. Coca-Cola regained market confidence, and Coke Classic became even more culturally entrenched than before. The brand emerged with a renewed understanding of itself. New Coke itself did not disappear immediately. It was later renamed Coke 2, and quietly phased out in the early 90s. Its legacy, however, remained enormous. Business schools continue to study the case as a lesson in the limits of market research and the danger of ignoring emotional loyalty. Marketers point to it as an example of how brands live, not just in products, but in memory and identity. The episode also marked a turning point in how companies approached brand heritage. After New Coke, many legacy brands became more cautious about altering core products. The risk was no longer just losing sales, but losing trust. The New Coke failure showed that consistency can be as valuable as innovation, especially for brands that represent continuity across generations. The conspiracy theory that Coca-Cola engineered the failure still resurfaces because it offers a comforting explanation. It suggests control rather than chaos. But the reality, as Donald Keough's quote makes clear, is more human. Companies make mistakes. Even the biggest brands can misunderstand their own power. The New Coke saga endures because it reveals something fundamental about culture. People do not just consume products, they form relationships with them. Coca-Cola learned, painfully and publicly, that emotional bonds cannot be measured in a lab. They must be respected. In the end, the return of Coke Classic was not a master plan. It was an apology. It was an admission that some things mean more than optimization. The story of New Coke remains relevant because it speaks to a tension that still exists today. The balance between data and instinct, between progress and tradition, between innovation and identity. Coca-Cola survived the mistake not because it was clever, but because it listened when it mattered most. That's why the story continues to be told, not as a tale of corporate genius, but as a reminder that even global brands are shaped by the emotions of the people who love them. Like, comment, and subscribe for daily history and culture content.